The 2024 presidential election is shaping up to be the closest in decades. It's the tightest race for the White House in the past 60 years. Recent polls show Harris leading nationally with 52% compared to Trump's 48%. The contest remains well within the margin of error and is still too close to call. However, Trump has an advantage in battleground Arizona and leading in tight races in Georgia and North Carolina, all swing states. That's according to the latest New York Times and Siena College survey. We're joined by Associate Professor Hans Noel. He is with the Department of Government at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Hans, we do have to take all these polls with a pinch of salt. That's a given. But the latest New York Times poll is particularly interesting. Overall, we've seen Harris mostly leading slightly in previous polls, but the latest one that zooms in on Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina shows Trump has an edge. Why did that happen?
Well, it's hard to know for exactly why it happened. As you say, we want to always be cautious looking at any one individual poll. So polls bounce around, and it's could just be noise. It could also be something real, but that won't last. But there is a little slight move in this direction. These are three states that are swing states, but they're swing states that probably were leaning a little bit towards Trump in the first place, as opposed to some of the other swing states that might be leaning a little bit towards Harris. So this isn't a huge amount of news, but it is a change. It's a move in a little bit more of a lead, especially in Arizona, and so that probably is driven a little bit by recent events bouncing around, the assassination attempt perhaps. But I think really we'll not know what's going on with these polls or anything else until we go another week or two and see whether or not that bounce is permanent or is just noise.
Now, in the US, it's possible for a presidential candidate to lose the popular vote but still win the elections. Example, 2016, Trump did not win the popular vote, but he won the White House. That's because he bagged the most electoral college votes. Given the electoral college system, how crucial is it winning states like Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina?
Yeah, so there's probably about 7 states we think in this particular election that are close enough that they're going to matter. There are 3 states across the north, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those maybe lean a little bit towards Harris, but they're really close, and we would say that they're up for grabs. Nevada is very, very close, and then these 3 states, as I say, have been sort of leaning a little bit towards Trump, and then this latest poll suggests that that's real. So you need to win enough of those votes. It's possible for Harris to win without any of the 3 that we've just been talking about. If she wins those 3 across the north, then it'll be very, very, very close. But of course, you don't want that. You want to be winning, clearly, and those states are also not guaranteed. So these are the places where the battle is happening, and not surprisingly, it's places where things are really close. It's also where the campaigns are paying a lot of attention. So you might expect then that both sides are making their cases, and things are bouncing back and forth in exactly those places, and we won't know until closer to the election what the outcome's likely to be.
Hans, one of the things that stood out to me about the NY poll, while Trump had that edge in those states, it's mainly him. Down ballot Republican candidates, those running for the Congress or the House of Representatives, are not seeing that bounce. How do we interpret that?
Well, Trump has sort of broken with a lot of the, sort of traditional attachment with the Republican Party. And so, he has his own brand. His own brand should extend to some of those candidates in those states. He's, attached to them. He's, identifying with them and, in some cases, encouraged and endorsed them and so on. But he still has, his own unique appeal that is very personal. And so when it comes to the margin of support and about the presidential election, he could break away from the standard. The fact that he's leading ahead of other Republicans is a good sign for Trump, because it suggests that whatever difficulties and whatever swing you might have one way or another between the parties, he's doing a little bit better and may break through on that end. Since we're expecting to be a very, very close race, that kind of difference could very well be the difference that makes the gives us the result.
Let's talk about another hot button issue here for voters in the United States, the economy. Last week, we saw the U.S. Central Bank or the Fed lower interest rates from after keeping them at 23-year highs as it tries to control inflation. How much of this rate cut will likely translate into voter sentiment, do you think, Hans, as borrowing becomes cheaper? For example, it will bring some relief to homeowners, people looking to buy a home with mortgage rates potentially coming down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the rate cut itself probably isn't going to have much of an effect. Most voters aren't paying that close of attention, and the ones who are paying attention probably are also paying a lot of attention to the election, and they already have made up their minds. But the swing voters, the voters whose positions yet are sort of yet to gel, a lot of them are going to be reacting to the state of the economy, how well things are going. There's a lot that goes into the state of the economy, not just inflation and not just interest rates, but as if interest rates cut a little bit, that tends to, make it easier to borrow. It makes it a little bit, prices feel less expensive because it's easier to get money. It also tends to juice demand a little bit, which could then, of course, have other consequences on inflation, which is why the Fed is trying to carefully, calibrate where this is. But assuming that the Fed has done its job correctly, which we will see, then that should, have positive effects on the economy, which means it should have positive effects for the incumbent party, in this case, Harris.
Well, just last question here for you, Hans. I would think that claiming a win over interest rates is kind of tricky for Kamala Harris, yeah, because on the one hand, it shows inflation is within control, but then the Fed is independent of government. But Trump, of course, alleging that the Fed is playing politics. So how does Kamala Harris weigh into this without kind of sounding like she's encroaching on the independence of the Fed?
Yeah, I think that mostly the politics of this is going to be inside baseball stuff. It's going to matter a lot to, us here in Washington, but it's not going to matter very much to ordinary voters. And so, the campaigns will say what they say and they'll try to spin things in the direction that they want to go. But really is what's going to matter is what are the actual consequences of the rate cut and any other economic policies on pocketbooks, the experience both individually as a voter and then also as people look around and what they sense the economy is doing. If they feel like the economy is improving, that inflation is not, is sort of, cooling down and so on, then that's usually means that they'll be sort of happier with the incumbent. If they start to feel like, well, no, things are worse and I'm worse off than I was 4 years ago, then they're going to be looking for a change. And how the campaigns sort of spin the specific policies about the Fed rate cuts and so forth isn't going to matter as much as how they spin the state of the economy itself. And if the message that they send about how well the economy is doing. And that's the kind of message that I expect to hear from both candidates in the next, weeks and months.
Hans Noel at Georgetown University, thank you very much for joining us here on NDTV this morning.